You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe rides again. Nick Wilson, Spencer German here with the latest at Ohio State. We have more staff news coming out of Columbus. We have it's the fifth Beatle, the 10th member of the coaching staff has officially been announced. There was a nasty bit of rumor surrounding that now 10th assistant in Columbus. Oh, yeah. I don't know if you guys know this. A lot of people still saying a lot of things and a lot of panicky things about the state of college football. But we're going to start the show with a guest. Spencer, by the way, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. It was a little weird doing the show without you earlier this week, but I think we had some good conversations, and I'm actually excited to not repeat the conversations, but get your perspective on some of the conversations that I had on Tuesdays, or on Wednesday rather, so it should be fun.
I'm ready for that, but in the meantime, we got to welcome on a guy who wrote a hell of a story on incoming, potentially, AD for Ohio State, Ross Bjork, and some of the allegations that have followed him from his first major Power 5 job at Ole Miss, then to Texas A&M, and that now inevitably fall at the doorstep of the beloved Ohio State, and he is Ohio State football beat writer for the Columbus Dispatch, Bill Rabinowitz. Bill, welcome to the show.
Nice to be on with you guys. How are you?
Well, I gotta say, we have debated about this Ross Bjork hire multiple times, and we've even debated how much does the AD matter now, or how has the AD job changed. So when your piece came out, I think it's the first Columbus-based piece that really gets into why this has become a controversial hire. So kudos on kicking ass on the piece. And the second thing is really like, can you just kind of encapsulate, without giving away everything in your wonderful story that people can find on the Columbus Dispatch, can you encapsulate kind of the criticisms at Ole Miss and then the criticisms at A&M?
Yeah, my story was really just about Ole Miss. I didn't really get into the A&M stuff. We're going to, get into that. As a paper, we're going to get into that also. That one was probably just more of a very, very bad misjudgment, extending Jimbo Fisher's contract and then not having a clause in the contract that would get them out of paying the full amount. But what happened in Ole Miss was in some ways fairly simple. Ole Miss has always kind of been in the shadows of Alabama and LSU, and they've always wanted to be a major program. They hire Hugh Freeze to replace Houston Nutt, and then there are these rumors of allegations, or even more than rumors. Some reporters, had pretty much had it. And it kind of came to a head in 2016, right around signing day is when this kind of hit. And they were all, understandably panicked about losing this banner recruiting class that they had coming in. I mean, it was like an unprecedented class for Ole Miss. And so, according to the people that I talked to, and Ross Bjork has denied this, and the ex-chancellor who I talked to also denied it, believe that Ross Bjork either told or directed others to lie, mislead, pick your verb, to tell recruits and reporters that this was all happened under the previous coach Houston Nutt, not under Hugh Freeze, which means that whatever penalties they would get probably would be not as bad because it wasn't the current regime. So according to the people I talked to, there was this plan to say, don't worry about it, all's fine. The Kevin Bacon character in Animal House, don't worry, all is well. And there was real cause. I mean, most of the infractions did take place under Hugh Freeze, and the reporters, felt duped. The recruits, or at least their fathers, felt like, wait a minute here, we were told one thing and it's the other, and they should have known, and they probably did know. There is some question about the timing of it and what Ole Miss knew and when. But I also know that when there is an NCAA investigation, they don't keep it a secret from the school. They want the school's cooperation. So long before the notice of allegations ever sees the light of day, the school has a pretty good clue what's going on.
Bill, something you wrote about in your piece that I thought was interesting and just kind of projecting, I guess, into the future at Ohio State was that, Ross talked about how he feels his past experiences, particularly at Ole Miss, where that was kind of the first time he dealt with something like that, where he had these NCAA violations against him and the program that he was helping oversee as AD, and how that kind of has prepared him now for almost anything that could come his way as he comes to Ohio State and takes this job. Do you think there's room for some latitude here in terms of believing that he has learned from that previous experience, and that if he was faced with something similar now, that he's changed in the way that he would maybe approach it and go about that situation?
I mean, I hope so. I think people can change and learn and grow. So, I mean, he's a smart guy. If you meet him, he's he kind of comes out of central casting. I mean, he's a nice looking guy. He's got a firm handshake. I mean, he's a very good at fundraising. I think anyone can learn. And I'm sure he kind of felt like he was thrown in the deep end. He did not hire Hugh Freeze. He inherited Hugh Freeze. He probably tried to make the best of a tough situation. There was a lot of, I think they went through 3 chancellors in the time that he was at Ole Miss. So he kind of had to be the guy because he was the guy who'd been there the longest. So he kind of got thrown into the deep end. Now the quote, I don't have that story in front of me, but I think the quote from the Ohio State president was, it was a Navy background, said a calm sea never produced a good sailor. And kind of the premise of the story was, well, did he cause that rough sea? And so it's an open question. I do know that there are a lot of people that question the hire, that knew about his history at Ole Miss, knew about his history at Texas A&M, and were like, this is the best they could get. There were proteges of Gene Smith that people thought would be strong candidates. Pat Shun at Washington State, Martin Jarmond at UCLA. But I think it's pretty clear that Ted Carter, the new president of Ohio State, wanted his own guy. And I mean, that's what I've been told. I don't know that. Ted Carter didn't directly answer that. I've not talked to him about that, so I don't know. But it was a surprising hire. I'll put it that way.
I'm just curious, you mentioned in the piece that he still has to be formally approved on, I think it was February 22nd.
Yeah.
As these things continue to come out, is there any sense whether Ohio State could get cold feet? Because, I mean, the allegations here are pretty damning, and it's kind of the thing that at a school like Ohio State would be something that would tarnish a pretty well-crafted image under Gene Smith and under what they've done with their coaches in all sports the last 30 years.
I don't know. I don't cover that part of Ohio State. I mean, our reporter who does, I've not talked to her since today at least, or since early yesterday. We have not heard anything from Ohio State, which I take as a compliment, because if there was something inaccurate with the story, I'm sure they would have voiced that. I don't know, and I don't have an agenda. It's not my place to say they should hire or not hire this guy. I just try to write the story, the best story I can write, the most accurate story I can write, and let the chips fall where they may. I don't have a horse in this race. I don't know. I mean, generally speaking, Ohio State's Board of Trustees is a rubber stamp for the president. I mean, it's not typical for them to kind of go against what the president wants. So I think it would take something pretty strong for that to happen. Whether this story or anything else that might come out is that, I'm not the person to ask.
Bill, I feel like from our perspective, I think it's hard to just, when you're not around the program or around Ohio State athletics every day or part of that world, to really assess what does this AD bring to the table? You're kind of just basing it off of some things that you wrote about, like what happened at Ole Miss, what happened at Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher, that type of stuff. So from our perspective, it feels to me like the fundraising piece, and I know that's such a valuable thing for ADs to be able to do nowadays anyway, but it seems like that was maybe the big piece as to why they liked Ross Bjork. Do you get the sense that that's true, that this was maybe on top of it being kind of I want to bring in my own guy, it also sort of just pointing to, we think this guy could really do us wonders in this NIL era, especially with the fundraising side of things?
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one job of an athletic director is fundraising. It's kind of like the number one job of a football coach is recruiting. I mean, yes. And he is a very good recruiter, or very good fundraiser. but like Texas A&M, for example, I mean, there's a lot of money in Texas, oil money and all that stuff. It's not that hard. But what I've been told by several people is that you get him in a room with kind of the fat cat donors, and he's really good. That he's very charming and very persuasive, and hey, that's a big part of the job. Gene Smith is like that. I mean, Gene Smith is a schmoozer. That's part of the job, and. But there are ways to go about it that, I mean, Gene Smith, I don't think Gene Smith has his critics, but by and large, I think people think that Gene Smith acts above board, that he has, certainly has a very good reputation. Ross Bjork's going to have to prove that, and only time will tell. I don't know him well. I will give him credit for talking to me for this story. A lot of people would have just said, no comment. It's 10 years ago. I'm not even going to touch it. Why are you even bothering? He never questioned why I did the story, the right of us to do the story. So I give him credit for that. And yeah, there were some things he didn't want to answer, and fine. I didn't expect him to answer everything, but he did answer almost everything that I asked him, with thoughtful answers. And again, I'm not trying to say who's right or wrong here. I'm just trying to say, this is the best, the most accurate story I could come up with that I could write.
Bill, what's fascinating about the job that he inherits is Ohio State now needs a men's basketball coach. There are several parts of the program that are rolling right now, including women's college basketball, which might be in Cleveland here with us at the Final Four in just a little bit. So, but then you look at football side of things, and there seems to be a feeling that this is a boom or bust year in Columbus, and the bust is anything less than beating Michigan and contending for a national title. So how does the Ross hire jive with what is perceived to be a bleeper get off the pot moment for Ryan Day in Columbus?
Well, look, anytime a coach is the AD is not the one who hired the coach, there isn't that kind of built-in loyalty. Having said that, I think what you said is absolutely true. If they don't beat Michigan and make a long run in the playoff, and it's a 12-team playoff this year, which means at a minimum get to the semifinals, it'll be considered a disappointing season. And because Michigan's going to be down, I mean, we expect Michigan to be down. I mean, they lose so many people, and Ohio State is loaded. I mean, the change in the way that people view Ohio State's 2024 team now compared to like right after the Cotton Bowl, when they didn't have a proven quarterback and they looked like they might lose a bunch of people in the draft, blah, blah, blah. They kept almost everybody. It was not realistic to keep Marvin Harrison Jr., but almost everybody else stayed. They have a quarterback. They got Caleb Downs out of the transfer portal, maybe the best player in the portal entirely, the safety from Alabama. They got a center, Seth McLaughlin. They got a great running back, There's Ole Miss, Quinshon Judkins. I mean, they're loaded. Ohio State is loaded. They and Oregon are clearly the two best teams in the Big Ten. That's going to be an epic game in Eugene. Yeah, it's all there for Ohio State this year, but they have to do it, and it'll be fascinating. There'll be a lot of pressure on them, but they embrace that pressure.
Given that they've kind of added this pressure to themselves just with the moves they've made this offseason, what is almost like the benchmark for Ryan Day? Obviously, beating Michigan, I think, is an obvious one. If you lose to Michigan a fourth straight year, that's not going to go over well. But beyond that, like, do they have to win the national championship for this season to be considered a success and people to kind of still stay on board with him because they're so loaded? Or is it simply beat Michigan and make some sort of a run in the playoff?
No, look, for anyone to say national championship or bust, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. It's really hard. Yeah. I mean, think about Ohio State. I say this all the time. Since 1968, when they won the national title, they've won it twice since then, and they have always been not just good, but almost always great. That's how hard it is to win a national championship. Now, they are star-crossed to some degree. I mean, how many times in the last several years even you say if Noah Ruggles makes the kick and several other things in that Georgia game happen, they beat TCU, right? There's a national championship. In 2019, Joe Burrow's LSU team would have been a tough game, obviously, but if not for some of the calls in the Clemson game, what would have happened that year? I mean, they've come so close. So to say, if you don't win a national championship, the season's a failure, that's unfair. I will say, though, that beating Michigan, probably winning the Big Ten, although Oregon is very good, and at least getting to the semifinals in the playoff is, I think that's the benchmark for what would keep the season from being a disappointment.
Bill, I think it's funny. Bill O'Brien and the hire was met with, let's say, mixed reviews. There were people in Columbus that loved it. There were people that hated it. And then you get Chip Kelly, who leaves the UCLA head coaching position to be the offensive coordinator here. And it's funny, like, I think some of what troubled people was just perception. And I hate when perception gets in the way of what we think of a specific hire. Then I'm curious, do you think that Chip Kelly is actually a better fit? Do you think Ohio State lucked into a better fit for what they want to do offensively than the guy who spent 21 illustrious days in Columbus before skittering back to Boston?
Yeah, with O'Brien, I actually talked to the two Penn State quarterbacks he worked with. I thought it was a pretty good story. Talked to Christian Hackenberg and Matt McGloin. I was like, oh, good. I've got, this insight into the next offensive coordinator, and he's gone. I was like, oh, well. But to your point, well, the one huge advantage is familiarity. I mean, Chip Kelly is Ryan Day's mentor. I mean, they don't have to get to know each other. Bill O'Brien and Ryan Day didn't really know each other. And so that's one advantage. The other, obviously, is Chip Kelly's history and background. I mean, he's an offensive genius, although I hate to use that word. I'm using that in quotes. But look, and it's been a while, and that's the question. It's been a while since he was at the cutting edge of offenses when he was at Oregon and the tempo and all that. But, he is I think Chip Kelly is maybe a better fit as an offensive coordinator than a head coach, because he doesn't like the schmoozing and the going to booster, speeches and even really recruiting, from what I've been told. Now he can be the guy who scribbles plays on a napkin, which I think is, what he loves to do. And you give him the X's and O's, and you give him Ohio State's talent, and you go, there's the mad scientist, and what can he come up with for game plans? That'll be fun to watch. And Ryan Day knows that for the last couple of years, he's been stretched too thin, especially last year when he lost Kevin Wilson. He had nobody with real play calling experience on the offensive side of the ball. And he knows in an era with NIL and with the transfer portal, where you got to constantly, manage the roster and make sure guys are not disgruntled. And you got to be a CEO. You can't be the guy scribbling plays on a napkin, not very much at least. And so for Ryan Day to get somebody that he knows is a kindred spirit and knows, I don't have to question whether Chip Kelly knows what he's doing. Of course he does. That's going to be huge. But the dynamic of protege becomes boss, who knows how that works out? I mean, I'm assuming they talked about it and they're fine with it, but that's not a dynamic that happens very often.
Is that part of the reason why maybe he picked Bill O'Brien initially first for the job? Like, why do you think he kind of circled back to choosing Chip Kelly instead of Bill O'Brien and hired Bill O'Brien first?
Yeah, I don't know. My guess is that he probably didn't think Chip Kelly was available. Chip Kelly was the coach at UCLA, and he had certainly been interested, and there was interest from the NFL with him. And so I think he probably thought, well, I don't know that that's likely to happen, and Bill O'Brien is likely to happen. I don't know. I haven't asked Ryan Day that. He has not told me that, but I do know that he is very excited to have Chip Kelly, that people on the staff are very excited to have Chip Kelly. I think if I'm a defensive coordinator in the Big Ten, I'm thinking, oh no, because Chip Kelly is really bright when it comes to play calling and schemes and all that. And so you combine that with the talent that Ohio State's going to have. And I put it this way, Ohio State only averaged like 30 points a game last year. I can pretty much guarantee they're going to average a lot more than 30 points next year.
Bill, one last thing for me in relation to the offensive coordinator situation, because I think when Bill O'Brien was hired, one of the biggest gripes from fans was, well, what are they going to do about Brian Hartline? He's got to hate this and he's got to be so upset about this and blah, 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 blah. Like, this is disrespectful. We've kind of said that we're assuming there was conversations had with Brian Hartline just about what was happening and why they were making this move, where it wasn't going to ruffle his feathers. And I understand, like, he's super important to just that they do at Ohio State. But what does a move like this mean for Brian Hartline? Is the hope that this becomes almost like a mentorship thing and he eventually can become a primary play caller? How do they kind of view him moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assumption. He didn't call the plays last year. He had the title and he had the raise. He got the raise, but he didn't do what traditionally offensive coordinators do, which is call plays. And so I think that probably, it's good to get a title. It's good to get a raise. Now he can get the knowledge. I don't know that Ryan Day had the time last year to give him, to teach him all that stuff. That's no criticism of Brian Hartline. He'd never been asked to do it. He's still a very young coach. And so the idea of Brian Hartline being able to learn from Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, I'm sure that's very attractive. You remember last year he was in demand, or we thought he was in demand for some big time jobs, and Ohio State had to make a move to keep him. And that would have been devastating to lose Brian Hartline, because he's the best recruiter in the country, maybe, certainly at wide receiver. I mean, the 5-star after 5-star. Jeremiah Smith, the freshman receiver from Florida, is considered a generational talent. And so I'm sure it might be on some level disappointing to Brian Hartline. I don't know. I haven't talked to him, but I think if he takes the big picture and realizes how this can benefit him, it's nothing but a benefit, nothing but a plus.
So we've kept you a little farther past when we wanted to. So I'm going to try and make these next two ones as quick as possible. James Laurinaitis is the 10th coach on the Ohio State staff. He's the new linebackers coach. There was a lot of debate about who was going to be that 10th coach. Why did it end up being James? And who else was considered, to your knowledge?
Yeah, I don't know that anyone else was considered. I think Laurinaitis, in a lot of ways, the natural fit. Obviously, he's a Buckeye. He's an All-American linebacker at Ohio State. He'd been on the staff for a couple of years. They got him back from Notre Dame, where he was a graduate assistant. He essentially coached the linebackers last year. Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, I guess technically was the linebackers coach, but he really delegated as much as he could to James Laurinaitis last year. So in that way, it really is. I don't say it's a no-brainer, but it pretty close to it. I mean, they needed a 10th person. It was going to be on the defensive side of the ball. They needed a linebackers coach, and who better than James Laurinaitis, who's already in the system and has his history.
All right, and then the whole time I've been paying attention to your guitar in the background. Do we have a shredder on? I mean, are you not just a writing whiz? You're also Eddie Van Halen in your off time.
Maybe Eddie Van Halen now. I'm sorry.
Too soon?
No, I kind of, I'm like, the guitars come from the books that I wrote. So I'm like the golfer who can't hit at 150 but has the best clubs. I mean, I've got great guitars. I mean, no, I'm strictly like a rhythm guitarist and just bang around in the house for fun. And my wife likes it, and I think my dog likes it, and that's
all that matters.
Yeah, I have a guitar. We've got an electric drum set, and mostly a lot of the instruments are for the kids to learn. But I like to keep them around as aspirations. Like, one day I will pick you up and learn you. It just isn't today.
Well, I started to play a couple of years ago. It's a long story I won't bore you with. Started to play the piano that we had sitting in our living room for 20 years, unplayed, because I never played piano. And my wife said, "You got to learn." I was like, "I don't." But I actually self-taught on piano.
Wow. Big
Latin way. So when I play piano, I feel like this is weird. I feel like I'm cheating on the guitars. These are inanimate objects. Like, if I play a bunch of piano, like, oh, the guitars are going to feel like I've neglected them. It's the stupidest thing you could ever think of.
Yeah, I have my uncle who passed away about 15 years ago. I have his keyboard.
Yeah,
and my girls just badly want to play it because it's cool and it's a nice keyboard, and he was a really gifted pianist. And I every time I'm like, sure, wait, you know what? Maybe not right now. Maybe like in 2 weeks. Yeah. And I've been doing that. I mean, my oldest is 13. She's been asking since she was 4. So one of these days I'll get around to it.
Never too late.
You're never too late, right? Bill, you're the best, man. So sorry for keeping you past what we
No
initially kind of planned there, but you did a fantastic job. Great job on the Ross Bjork piece.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Really appreciate that, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill.
It's at dispatch.com if you want to read it. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, guys, when we come back, we'll react to what Bill had to say, and Spencer's going to play something for me to react to. But first, a word from our sponsors. Excellent.